many more people use alcohol and tobacco, and fewer people use, so the alcohol and tobacco problems are somewhat driven by numbers. With heroin and methamphetamine, it's that the drug itself causes much more harm to the individual and to others. And what's striking about cannabis is that the bad consequences are mostly borne by the user himself, not like with heroin, where it's the spread of HIV and other diseases through shared needles that brings it to people other than the user. And I won't go through this in detail, but to give you a sense that there have been efforts to make a comparative evaluation. This is a French effort, and you can sort of see from the stars, a star is bad, 2 stars is very bad. You can see there are many fewer stars in the marijuana column than there are in the columns for the other drugs. I think what's an easier one to see is an effort by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, to assess the harms associated with cannabis, and they note it's not injected, which is a major source of harms from the use of other drugs. It's much less toxic than certainly cocaine and opiates, but even less than ecstasy. The treatment demand, which is one reflection of how troubled people are, is much smaller, only about 70 per 1,000 users as compared to about 70 for cocaine. And there are very few drug deaths related to cannabis use. So it's not without harms, but it constitutes, in the current regime, a pretty modest public health problem. In many Western countries, I don't know the Brazilian data, I've looked for Brazilian data, don't think I have good command of that. But in many Western countries, a simple way of understanding how common it is to sort of look at everybody born since 1970 who reached the age of 21. And in lots of countries, half of those people have tried marijuana. So it's a part of the development experience for most teenagers in lots of Western countries. Not in Sweden, but you go to Switzerland, UK, France, or Australia, you find the same pattern. Prevalence is highest amongst people, young adults, as low as 15, it's basically 18 to 29. The use has declined. It's sort of interesting patterns, declined through the 1980s, went up in the 1990s, and now in many countries it's going down, indeed quite sharply in some countries. Most people use cannabis only a few times, but more than we would have expected. Use it for for a number of years. So it's not that there's just a small tail of people who use it regularly. There are in fact about a third probably go on to use it 5 to 10 years. Something like that. Most of them will not experience any problems, but about 10% will qualify as having become dependent on the drug because they've tried to quit and been unable to do so. The effects of being dependent on marijuana are much less serious than being dependent on alcohol or on cocaine, but nonetheless, they really are a problem for those users. Only a minority will want to use other drugs. Even at the worst period in the US, when cocaine use was very common, only about less than a quarter of marijuana users went on to use cocaine or heroin or any other serious drug. There is a step, I think there's good research showing that there is a stepping stone, but most people don't take the step. So it's sort of not a major gateway. Well, that's about the demand side. On the production side, the really important thing is that most countries grow their own. It's largely a domestic business. There are only a couple of countries, Mexico and Morocco, that really are big exporters, the Netherlands and Canada, smaller. Lots of small producers, often selling through informal networks rather than selling in markets the way that cocaine and heroin gets sold. And there's not much violence around cannabis distribution. I should put a asterisk here. I don't know the experience in Brazil, and Brazil's violence around distribution of cocaine makes me nervous that I don't know that there might be more associated with cannabis here than in other countries, but in other countries it really is a very much lower violence than with other drugs. And I mentioned talking about those. And whatever it is that's done to control the market, country after country, kids report that the drug is available or readily available to them. 80% in many countries. In the US, 90% of 18-year-olds report that it's readily available or available to them. That, despite the fact that there's a lot of enforcement activity, particularly aimed at users. Not just in the US, you probably, given that the US sort of tends to be well known outside of, outside in the world generally, you probably know there are 800,000 arrests each year for possession of cannabis. That's a big number. No other country has such a large number. But if you do it on a per capita rate, the US is by far not the most extreme. Countries like Switzerland and Australia also arrest lots of people, particularly young people, for marijuana, cannabis, just simple possession, and the number is growing. So it's not, even though you have a sense that the world is getting more liberal towards cannabis, it doesn't show up in terms of arrests. Police are doing more. Most of those are arrested are young, and there's a disproportionate arrest of minorities or marginal populations, the most vulnerable groups. Very few of the arrests result in anything other than fines. That is, they're not sentenced to jail or prison. But in the US, where the pre-trial system works very badly, lots of them spend time in jail before sort of getting released and being given the fine and convicted and being given the fine. And the real problem is that lots of people then sort of suffer, have the consequences of a conviction and of this sort of short time in jail, and that's not a minor event in their lives. And the question is, what is the consequence of that? And the best one can interpret of the research is that it makes no difference to the number of people who are using the probability that someone uses cannabis. In other words, states in the US that have high arrest rates don't show lower prevalence of cannabis use than ones that arrest very few. So, 10 years ago, we would never have said anything about treatment of the cannabis. It just seemed like an unimportant phenomenon. That's completely changed in the last decade. There are now quite substantial numbers going into drug treatment because of cannabis problems. In the EU, nearly 30% of everyone admitted to drug treatment in 2005 was there because of cannabis. And in the US, there's been a huge escalation in the number. It's still a very small fraction of those who use the drug, but it's a very important phenomenon that now you see people seeking treatment for cannabis. And the question is, what's driving this? Now, even in the Netherlands, where police are not arresting users, you see the same increase. And so it suggests that this may be driven by something about the drug itself. And one possibility is that the increased potency is causing a problem. And Amanda actually knows much more about the science of what connects potency and changes in the composition of cannabis to treatment seeking. But this is sort of an interesting warning signal, a reminder that this drug, which is seen by many people as largely benign, is in fact causing real problems in the user population. So whatever our recommendations are, we want you to understand, we ground them in an understanding that this is a drug that causes problems to a significant fraction of the people who use it. Apparently I don't have anything more to say. So here are some conclusions about the way the drug is right now. In the current regime,